Can it possibly be that the longstanding legal battle between John Dehlin of Mormon Stories and Jenn Kamp, formerly of Mormon Stories, has finally come to an end? It appears to be so. Join me tonight and listen to all the latest news here on Radio Free Mormon. Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3. This is Radio Free Mormon on the air, broadcasting behind enemy lines. Well, today's date is February 1st, 2025. There's been a lot of movement happening in the Bankruptcy Court in January of this year. I want to keep you up to date on that. And it looks like, yes, it looks like that this case may finally be over. Before I get to the resolution of the bankruptcy case, however, I want to take a little bit of a tour through time since I began reporting on this story. I have followed this story, I think, every twist and turn along the way, and there have been a lot of twists and turns over the past 3 years in this lawsuit. So we'll look at that. I'm also going to tell you a number of stories that have occurred behind the scenes that I haven't told you before, but I think now that the case is over, it's okay for me to talk about them, and I plan on doing so. I've got 3 or 4 things I want to tell you about that I think you have not heard before, because I'm pretty sure I haven't mentioned them. But I have a slideshow to guide me in this discussion. The first case is the defamation lawsuit in Utah, the one that John Dehlin and Open Stories filed against Jenn Kamp about 2 years ago. I think I said 3 years earlier. It's been going on. It's actually been going on for around 2 years, maybe 2.5 if you go to the initial firing of Jenn Kamp from Open Stories. Legally speaking, legal filing speaking, around 2 years this has been going on. And as I say, it started off with a defamation case. Well, technically, that's not where it started off, but we'll get to that in a second. The second case is the bar complaints that were filed by Jenn Kamp and her friends against yours truly. Yes, those badass bitches had a field day filing bar complaints against me. I ended up beating them all and coming out victorious, I'm happy to say. Number 3 was the anti-stalking protection order hearing that Jenn Kamp had against John Dehlin. That was in March of 2023. 4th was the criminal charge filed against John Dehlin that Jenn Kamp actually got the prosecutors down in Utah to file. And that was crazy because that was immediately dismissed, as I predicted it would be. Number 5 was the bankruptcy case in Washington State that Jenn Kamp filed. And that was after, I don't think I listed her sham divorce that she filed in Utah with her husband, allegedly sham. And I'm the one who's alleging it. The bankruptcy case in Washington State and the divorce case in Utah, right? She files for divorce, then she files for bankruptcy right before a critical hearing in the defamation case in Utah, so that hearing could not go forward. We'll talk about that more later. That was back on July 5th of last year, 2024, when she filed for bankruptcy. And then finally, today, the epilogue to the bankruptcy case. This should be a lot of fun. And what I've done is I've gone back and I've gathered a number of thumbnails from shows I've done about this case to lead us along under these different categories. So this will not be strictly chronological because there's a lot of overlap between some of these different cases that were going on, but we'll deal with them topically as opposed to chronologically. First is the Utah defamation case. There's the first thumbnail. John Dehlin files countersuit against Jenn Kamp. So once again, this by way of clarification, this did not start with John Dehlin and OSF filing a defamation case against Jenn Kamp. It started with Jenn Kamp filing a harassment case against John Dehlin and OSF. The problem was that she filed it in the wrong courthouse, not just the wrong courthouse, but the wrong court system. She filed it in federal court, and I think that was in January of 2023. Now, because it was filed in the wrong court, it ultimately got dismissed. It didn't go anywhere, but that's really where it started. And, it also started with Jenn Kamp getting her own podcast, Our Truth Be Told, I think it was called, Our Truth Be Told, and reading things and saying things, defamatory things about John Dehlin all over the place. It was remarkable, really. But legally speaking, it started with Jenn Kamp filing a lawsuit against John Dehlin and OSF. It was filed in the wrong courthouse. And then John Dehlin and OSF filed a defamation case against Jenn Kamp in the right courthouse, which was a state court. So they filed it against Jenn Kamp. And when I was reporting on this, I was struggling for a way to clarify this, to make it as clear as possible, because it really wasn't fair to say that John Dehlin initiated this by filing a lawsuit against Jenn Kamp, because that wasn't the case. On the other hand, it wasn't that easy to collapse everything I just described to you about how these two lawsuits ended up being filed in one title, in a thumbnail. So I decided to call it a countersuit against Jenn Kamp that John Dehlin filed. And technically, maybe not, but it gets the idea that Jenn Kamp filed first and John Dehlin filed a countersuit against her. Because it was in a different court where Jenn filed, ultimately got dismissed. Technically not correct. It's not a countersuit, but it is a suit that was filed against Jenn Kamp because she filed that lawsuit in the first place. That's what I meant by a countersuit. Okay, so that's what got it rocking and rolling 2 years ago. Now, the next video that I posted, I'm not going to go through all of them, just through a few. The next video that I had posted, I got a hold of the 2-hour, hour and 45-minute board meeting that occurred between Jenn Kamp, John Dehlin, and two other members of the board. I think the entire board was made up of these two plus John Dehlin. And this was the chronology, if you recall. It was August 25th, 2022, that Jenn Kamp was called in by John Dehlin to the office on a Thursday afternoon. I believe the calendar will show that was a Thursday. On a Thursday afternoon, it was a work day, to have a work meeting regarding her job as the executive director or manager. I can't remember the exact title. It was somewhat grandiose for a person with her qualifications, but nevertheless, to talk with her about her job and how she was doing, because she had a supervisory capacity over other employees at Mormon Stories. This meeting, which was one-on-one between Jenn Kamp and John Dehlin, went badly. And Jenn Kamp complained almost immediately to the board members that she felt she had been wrong, that she wanted to have a board meeting about this, that she felt it needed to be aired out and corrected. And so the board had a meeting the following Tuesday, which was August 30th of 2022. And that meeting was recorded. The way I was able to get a hold of it to publish it is because when John Dehlin and OSF filed their lawsuit, they included a link to this video in their lawsuit. And that link goes to YouTube, where this video is hosted. It just wasn't published, but once it was made public record by being filed in court, I was able to access it and make it so that you could see exactly what happened. This was an almost 2-hour meeting. And it was very important. It was very important for everybody to be able to see what happened in this 2-hour meeting, because Jenn Kamp had gone on after the meeting and made many, many misstatements, material misstatements and fabrications about what happened in this meeting. One of which was it wasn't long enough. It was an hour and 45 minutes. Another of which was they didn't give her a chance to talk much. She talked by far the majority of the time. And the reason she had to say this after the fact is because nowhere during this meeting does she raise the issue of sexual harassment. She had never raised the issue of sexual harassment with John in the meeting he had one-on-one with her. She'd never raised it with anybody before. She never raised it at this meeting. And then after this meeting is over, when it's pretty clear to her that she's going to have to be looking for a new job, then she starts raising the issue of sexual harassment. Well, comes the argument. If you were sexually harassed by John Dehlin while you were employed at Open Stories, which would have been before this meeting on August 30th, 2022, with the board, why didn't you mention anything about it? That's the question, right? And Clint here, the man in the lower left-hand corner in the black t-shirt, asked her specifically. He didn't know, but he's asking, he's trying to make sure he understands what's going on, because it is hard for him to understand what it is that Jenn Kamp is complaining about that happened in this meeting, because she's so unspecific. But he wants to make it clear, we're not talking about sexual harassment here or anything, are we? And she makes it clear, no, we're not. Okay, Jenn. So why is it that if you were sexually harassed, that would seem to be the main thing you'd want to complain about to the board? Why didn't you mention anything about it at the board meeting? So that's why she has to come back and say that she wasn't given enough time to talk. Wrong. She was given plenty of time to talk. That's why she has to come back later and say, I wasn't able to answer the questions because I kept getting talked over. That's wrong, as the tape shows. And she has all of these excuses for why she didn't do what a reasonable person would expect her to do, which is bring up sexual harassment, if indeed she had been sexually harassed and it wasn't something she thought up later in order to get back at John Dehlin and OSF, which is what it looked like it was. Oh, I remember there was one thing in this video that was so amazing. It was Jenn Kamp telling what I consider to be the most bald-faced lie I may have ever seen, at least from an adult. I mean, you see a lot of bald-faced lies from kids, right? This is from an adult. And what happens here? What happens here is that at the meeting 5 days earlier with just Jennifer Kamp and John Dehlin, Jenn Kamp had left the meeting of 45 minutes saying that she had recorded the entire meeting with John Dehlin. She announced that to John Dehlin as she was leaving the studio. There had been nobody else there, but she says she recorded it. So what happens now is that she's making all these representations about how rude and domineering and threatening John Dehlin was at the meeting to her. And that's what she wants to bring to the board's attention, not sexual harassment. It's all about this meeting, right? Well, she says she recorded it. John says that he was concerned because she said that. She never denies it. She admits she recorded it. So Clint now in the lower left-hand corner says, hey, I tell you what, since you've given us this version of what happened at the meeting, which sounds like it might be kind of bad if that's the way it really happened. You said you have the recording. Would you mind playing the recording so we can verify and confirm your version of events, Jennifer? And this is what happened. And I clipped this out and put it on my TikTok channel.
So, when you first told me about this and said, hey, do you want to listen to this recording? I said, no. Now I'm starting to wonder if maybe Carrie and I should listen to it so that we can have a good feeling of what's going on. Do you think that would be smart?
It's up to you. It was started, I think there's only like 15 minutes of, or 10 minutes, I don't know, somewhere between there, 10 and 15 minutes of, actually, you know what? I deleted it.
Ha!
As soon as you said you didn't want to hear it, and John didn't reach out to me to hear it, I think I deleted it. I can check if there's a deleted folder.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, see?
Oh,
it's the last one's my daughter's music class.
Yeah, I don't know how that kind of stuff works, but.
So there it is, what I have sometimes referred to as the worst lie ever. First off, the whole tape was for 45 minutes, but maybe she didn't get the whole tape. She got like 15 minutes of it, but notice the progression. Big pause after Clint asked her to see the video or the audio, listen to the audio that she had made. Big pause. Then she's got to think about it. And then she's got to qualify by saying she only got about 15 minutes. Why is she even doing this if she deleted it? Right? This is one of the things that makes this lie so bad. Why is she going there? Big pause. Let's talk about how short the tape is. Let's talk about how bad the quality of the tape might be. Then let's take a much bigger pause and say, you know what? I deleted it. Why would she delete it? She says she deleted it because nobody said that they were interested in it. Why would she delete that audio? It's worth its weight in gold if it actually represents what it is that Jenn Kamp claims it represents. And if that meeting with John Dehlin one-on-one really went the way that Jenn says the meeting went. No, she deleted it in the worst lie ever. In fact, that's so bad. I think we should play it again just for old time's sake.
So, when you first told me about this and said, hey, do you want to listen to this recording? I said, no. Now I'm starting to wonder if maybe Carrie and I should listen to it so that we can have a good feeling of what's going on. Do you think that would be smart?
It's up to you. It was started, I think there's only like 15 minutes of, or 10 minutes, I don't know, somewhere between there, 10 and 15 minutes of, actually, you know what? I deleted it. As soon as you said you didn't want to hear it, and John didn't reach out to me to hear it, I think I deleted it.
I think she deleted it too. I think that when she listened to it and found out that it did not match her story, she said, there's no way I want this to continue to exist because it doesn't help my case any. Now, what happened after that meeting, though, is that Clint asked John if there were any recording devices in the studio itself. And John mentioned the security camera, the little bubble up on the ceiling. I'm sure you're familiar with those. You've seen a lot of those. Well, they have one there in the studio, and that might have captured it. And indeed, they went back and they looked at whatever they had to look at to retrieve it. It was still there. It did capture it. It wasn't like, focused on the two people, but you could hear absolutely everything during the meeting, and you could see them from the top, and you could see part of John's legs and the top of his hat as well. The reason I'm saying this is because I saw this video, and I think I've mentioned that, but not very much. So I want to talk to you about that as well. But first, let me finish this story. The story is that they looked at the video, which you have not seen, but I have. They looked at the video of what happened in this meeting, this one-on-one meeting from the prior Thursday on August 25th, 2022. And what they saw was exactly the opposite of what it is that Jenn Kamp claimed happened in the meeting. No, John was not being domineering and threatening to her. She was being that way to John from beginning to end of the meeting. It was astonishing. And it was because of that Open Stories Foundation, through the board, said, we can't have this person working here anymore. She just lied to our faces, and she lied to say that John Dehlin was harassing her in this meeting. And we get, fortunately, after she's deleted the meeting, we get a separate audio. We're lucky enough to find that there's this video through the surveillance system that captured it, even though she deleted it. And when they looked at it, they find out that she was actually the one who was harassing John Dehlin. So they said, we can't have her anymore. And she was fired. And rightfully so, I think. That's what happened there as far as that timeline. And that's why my posting of the board meeting was so important, because Jenn Kamp did to the board meeting what she had done to her meeting with John, which is she had grossly misrepresented what happened. Well, we had the video for the board meeting, once again, filed with a case. So I was able to access it because it was public information and put it up for everybody to look at. I don't believe I put any commentary in there. I think that what I did was I just put up the meeting so that everybody who was interested could look at the meeting, could look at what Jenn Kamp was saying happened in the meeting, and compare those for themselves to see if indeed her representation of what happened in the meeting matched. And it didn't, not at all. All right. Once again, she was trying to make the excuses for why she didn't bring up sexual harassment. And none of those excuses flew. In fact, they contradicted the tape of the actual board meeting itself. All right. So let me talk to you a little bit about this meeting and the tape of the meeting, the first meeting, the meeting that started it all back on Thursday afternoon of August 25th, 2022. Early in the morning, I think you know this by now, but it's good to go back and rehearse it. John Dehlin had emailed or texted or communicated with Jenn somehow, who was working at home a lot. This is toward the end of COVID. It's actually kind of after the end of COVID, but she's still working home a lot. And John wants her to come into the office, which is, I think, around a 15-minute drive for her to the studio to have a meeting that afternoon around 2 or 2:30. So not that evening. It's not on a weekend. It's on a weekday. She's getting paid for this, and she's getting paid a lot for this. So she ends up going down for the meeting with John Dehlin. Now, something that has not been mentioned very much was the purpose of that meeting. Why did John Dehlin want Jenn Kamp to come down to the studio for a meeting? Well, the reason why is because it was a review of her job performance. She had been failing, at least from John Dehlin's point of view, to do her job. Part of her job was to supervise other people who were working there for Open Stories Foundation, and Jenn Kamp wasn't doing it. Without mentioning the name of the employee, my understanding is that in earlier meetings, Jenn Kamp had come to John Dehlin about this particular employee and said, she's screwing things up. She doesn't know what she's doing. She just needs to be fired. And John Dehlin asked Jenn, well, have you showed her how to do it right? And Jenn says, well, no. And John says, well, you're the supervisor, okay? So this is part of your job. We don't just go firing people because they make mistakes. We train them and see if they can learn. And hopefully they'll be able to learn, because this particular person that they were talking about, quite capable, completely able to learn things, at least one would think. So he says, okay, I want you to go back to this person, this employee, and tell them what to do. Okay, we're not going to fire her. Just tell her what to do. Try and train her. Take a few minutes with her, for God's sake, and see if you can teach her how to do what it is she's supposed to do. And this has to do with video and shorts and all sorts of things having to do with the technical aspect of Open Stories Foundation and Mormon Stories. So John Dehlin leaves Jenn Kamp with that instruction, with that mission that she's supposed to do. And now some time had gone by. And through a twist of circumstances, I believe, John Dehlin, through talking with this employee, finds out that actually Jenn Kamp has never talked to this employee. Even after John Dehlin told Jenn Kamp to go and talk to this employee to tell her how to do things right. Well, John Dehlin finds out Jenn Kamp had never done that. And so John Dehlin calls for a meeting. This is my understanding. Calls for a meeting with Jenn Kamp on that fateful Thursday afternoon, August 25th, 2022, to talk with Jenn Kamp about this issue. Why did you not supervise? Why did you not tell this employee how to do things correctly the way I told you to do? Okay, this is part of your job. Why haven't you done this? And this employee continued to make a mistake, made another mistake. John Dehlin talks to him and says, well, didn't Jenn Kamp correct this with you? And the employee says, no, Jenn Kamp's never talked to me. Yeah, John Dehlin wants to have a meeting with Jenn Kamp about that. You bet. Once again, this is my understanding of the circumstances surrounding it, all right? Jenn Kamp then comes into the meeting at 2 or 2:30 on Thursday afternoon, and it's very obvious that Jenn Kamp knows what the purpose of the meeting is. This has been an issue of some long standing with her job and how it is she's performing it, and that John Dehlin is not satisfied with how she's performing her job, at least in this particular respect. So before I tell you what happens when Jenn Kamp gets there, let me tell you that I have seen this video. I saw this video over 2 years ago, and I saw it in circumstances where I was not able to present a copy to you. I would have loved to have presented a copy to you so you could see exactly what's in this video of the one-on-one meeting with Jenn Kamp and John Dehlin, a video that has never been shown, to my knowledge. I believe that the attorneys for John Dehlin and OSF may have had some concern about the admissibility of such a video since it was gathered without the permission of those involved and it was being recorded from this bubble overhead. And so I think that had something to do with it. I don't know that I necessarily agreed with their analysis, but they know Utah state law better than I do, okay? So they never entered it in evidence like they did with the board meeting video. So I was never able to access it and put it up there, but I was able to watch it early on. Here is my perception, all right? I'm sorry that I cannot present this video to you. I have tried hard all along the way, countless times to get a hold of this video, to show it to you. And I have met a dead end each time, including as recently as yesterday. Now that the case is over, can I get a copy of this video? I want to show this video. No, I can't get a copy of the video. Okay. So in the absence of showing you the video, which would be the best, right? That would be the ultimate thing that I could do. All I can do is tell you what it showed and what my feelings about it were. And I'll try and leave it on the what it showed more than my feelings. First, what it showed. It shows Jenn Kamp coming into the studio down there at Mormon Stories. John Dehlin, I believe, is already there. She comes into the studio. And like I said, we don't see a nice side shot of them. This isn't being shot for production. This is from a little ball up in the ceiling. So we see where they are if they pass by that area where the ball covers, because it's not in the middle. It's over here in the corner by the door that you used to get in. But we can see some of them. We can't really see their faces. But what happened was this. Jenn Kamp arrived immediately taking the offense and criticizing John Dehlin for making her come into the office on a day when she was scheduled to be working from home. And Jenn Kamp was insistent that John Dehlin take responsibility and apologize for having done this and agree to provide written notice of any day when he wanted her to come in, when it was otherwise a day for work from home day, to give her written notice 24 hours in advance. I can't remember how long it was in advance. It was at least 24 hours in advance of his desire to have her come into the office to work there if he had something that he needed her to do. Well, this didn't go over well with John. And I was surprised at how composed he was. But he wasn't going to take responsibility for it because he's the boss He wanted to come in. He needs to talk to her. And now she's complaining about it. Okay. So having described the purpose for the meeting, which obviously John knew, and obviously Jenn knew, and obviously you know now, it is very clear from watching the video that Jenn Kamp had no intent of giving John the opportunity of ever raising the issue about her poor job performance, which is why the meeting was called in the first place. She was never going to let him get to that. And indeed, he never was able to get to it. And the reason is because this was her issue. Her issue was being called in without enough notice on a work day. And she plowed into that with John. And like I said, John didn't say he was sorry. And he didn't agree to 24 hours. Maybe he did. I don't know. But he wasn't going to say he was sorry. That's what she wanted. She obviously wanted John to say he was sorry, to agree with her, and to say that he was wrong in calling her into the office on a work day. So when it got to the end of the round one, where she had been lambasting him about how he had treated her, and he refused to say he was sorry, he refused to say he agreed with her, well, that was her cue to gin it all up again, and we go around from the very beginning. And she starts lambasting him about calling her into the office. And this happened 3-4 times. So this was the whole meeting, going in this circle about how bad she felt John should feel about calling her into the office. And John saying, I don't feel bad about it. Now, at the end, I also got to see her finally get up and leave and tell John, yeah, I just want you to know I recorded this whole meeting. Bad move. There are others who heard about this fact situation. I'm not at liberty to tell you who they were, who heard about this and who said, just an employee saying that after we had a meeting that I tape recording a private meeting with your boss. Yeah, that's grounds right there for firing. That's what other people said. I don't know if I would agree, but I certainly might consider it. However, what I know is grounds for firing is not necessarily her recording the meeting. It's the way she acted during the meeting. I swear to you, I'm watching this for the first time and I'm looking at this and we are 10, 15 minutes into what ends up being a 45-minute or so meeting, excuse me. So 10 or 15 minutes in, and I swear to you, I am looking at this and I am thinking, at what point does John Dehlin fire Jenn Kamp? 10 or 15 minutes into this video, I am thinking, at what point does John Dehlin fire Jenn Kamp? Because she is acting so insolent, so privileged. She's acting like she's the boss. I'm watching this and I'm thinking, if I didn't know who these people were, I would think she was the boss because she's the one who's being demeaning to John Dehlin. And she's the one who's telling him what the lay of the land is. And she's telling him how he's going to perform his job. And she's not even a good boss. She's a mean boss. She's a bad boss. That's how she presented herself. That's why after 10 or 15 minutes, I'm saying, at what point do you fire her? John Dehlin didn't fire her during that meeting. I would have cut that meeting short and said, you're out of here. Leave your key. You can come get your stuff later, but you're out of here. But he put up with that crap from Jenn Kamp for the entire meeting. He didn't cave to her in the sense of saying, I agree with you that I'm in the wrong, John Dehlin speaking, for calling you in. And then she leaves and, it's done. John Dehlin wanted to make this thing right so much that even after the board meeting and even after the board meeting, the board members see the video of the one-on-one meeting and they realized how grossly Jenn Kamp had mischaracterized that meeting during the course of the board meeting. They knew she had lied to them about John Dehlin. And it's not a small lie. You're lying about your boss harassing you. And there's proof showing he didn't. I mean, you don't want to keep somebody like that on. That is kryptonite in a company. But what happens is, even after all that, John Dehlin sends Jenn Kamp, I think he recorded a video of something of himself talking to her, explaining his side of things, still trying to apologize for what he felt he did was wrong and strike a rapprochement where Jenn could come back. I don't think that's wise, but it's certainly charitable. And that's what John Dehlin did. And of course, Jenn Kamp used it against him to say, oh, he was violating her wishes to not be contacted, even though it happened before she expressed any wishes to not be contacted. I mean, really, you cannot be anywhere near a person like Jenn Kamp and hope to escape unscathed, because they will get you no matter what they have to say and no matter how much they have to lie. They will get you one way or another. And this is what Jenn Kamp has been trying to do all along the way. And this is why this is such a glorious day for celebration, that this case is finally over and John Kamp was vindicated against all these allegations made against him by Jenn Kamp, these false defamatory allegations. And that's not just my opinion. That's the ruling and court order from Judge Faust in Salt Lake City, that she defamed John Dehlin. That is on the record, Jen, and you know it is. So that's the way things are. You defamed John Dehlin and you didn't get away with it. Yeah, you might say you got away with some of it because of the whole bankruptcy thing, but we'll get to that more here in a second. But I wanted to tell you the background story behind that video, the short one, 45 minutes, the one-on-one video from August 25th, 2022. So you could know the backstory on that, why it is I haven't been able to show it to you, that I have tried to show it to you, but I have been rebuffed, and to let you know in thumbnail form what it is that's contained in that video. All right, so if we go to the next slide. Oh, that was my TikTok, right? My TikTok of worst lie ever. The video of the original meeting between Jenn Kamp and John Dehlin on Thursday afternoon, August 25th, 2022, not published. This was my slide to remind me to tell you the story I've already told you. And Jenn Kamp then requested a board meeting, which was held on Tuesday, August 30th, 2022, which was published. Okay, I've told you all about the first video, which was not published. Another video I did on that defamation lawsuit was the attempt by Jenn Kamp to sue me. What happened was that very late in the game, she tried to file counterclaims. This is earlier in 2024. This is after her last set of attorneys bailed on her. Hepworth Legal it was. And I think they bailed on her in December of 2023 or January of 2024. She's representing herself now. And they had tried to bring this motion as well, and they had been denied. But let me tell you what happened, all right? First off, Hepworth Legal, while they're representing Jenn Kamp, brings a motion for counterclaims. In other words, for her to make counterclaims against John Dehlin and OSF, which is a totally natural and normal and expected thing that would happen in a civil lawsuit like that. In the counterclaims, she would basically encapsulate the claims that she had made against John Dehlin and OSF in the federal lawsuit that she had misfiled at the very beginning of things. But she has an opportunity to litigate those here in Utah. All she has to do is make the counterclaims, the allegations against John Dehlin. All right. For whatever reason, and this was astonishing, really, that her attorneys at Hepworth Legal blew past the deadline for filing counterclaims on her behalf. And they did it to such a degree. It wasn't a little miss, I don't think, but it was a miss. And those deadlines can sometimes be deadly if you miss them. They were denied the ability to file counterclaims on behalf of Jenn Kamp. Now, it's obviously that I'm somewhat partisan in this case, but regardless of whether I'm partisan or not, I can tell that these attorneys made a huge snafu. They left their client because they blew past the deadline. It got past them. They didn't see it. They left their client now, Jenn Kamp, in a lawsuit where she has all these allegations made against her of defamation, and she is bereft of the ability to file or argue counterclaims against John Dehlin and OSF. She's got no lawsuit anymore. She's just the defendant. She's not a plaintiff in any of this, all right? Or a counter plaintiff, technically, as it might be called. So the best thing that can happen to her now at trial is zero. If she has counterclaims, the best thing that could happen to her at trial is a jury could disbelieve Open Stories Foundation and John Dehlin. They could believe her, and she could be awarded money, right? But when she has no counterclaims, she's got nothing to go after the other guy. They're the people with stuff going after her. So they can get lots and lots of money out of her. The worst case scenario for them is zero. The best case scenario for Jenn is zero. All right. So what happened was Hepworth filed this late motion to ask the judge for permission to allow them to file their counterclaims late. Judge says no. They start scrambling because they're in trouble now. they're in trouble professionally. So they have to file a motion for reconsideration, which is improperly filed, really, because a motion for reconsideration is more than just asking a judge a second time to rule your way on a motion when the judge didn't rule your way the first time. It's supposed to bring up stuff factually or legally, stuff that through reasonable diligence the attorney could not have put in the first motion. That's one of those requirements. But basically, they're scrambling, and so they treat this as a second. Please, please, please. We know we screwed up the deadline, but please let us file the counterclaims. Judge says no. So what happens now when Hepworth Legal leaves the scene? I think they fired Jenn and Jenn fired her, and I think they both probably had good cause. Jenn's representing herself. So now in 2024, Jenn Kamp, by the way, it was January 2024, if I said that wrong before, that they leave. And the cheese stands alone. Jenn Kamp now is representing herself. Jenn Kamp knows she has to get these counterclaims in. They're critical. So now she files a motion to have her counterclaims included. The judge denies it. Obviously, OSF and John Dehlin's lawyers are objecting on all these counts, even when Hepworth is bringing the motion. But the judge agrees with it. Judge denies Jenn Kamp's motion. He says, we've already heard this before. And Jenn Kamp, I don't know if she's thinking, well, those are my lawyers, so now I get to bring it now that I'm not represented by the lawyers. No, it doesn't matter who represents you. You don't get to bring a motion, the same motion multiple times, just in hopes that the judge is going to grant your motion. Otherwise, if we could do that, the legal system, the justice system would be even more congested than it already is. Can you imagine a person bringing the same motion 20 times before a judge, hoping that on the 20th time, the judge is going to say yes, when the judge has said no 19 times before? So she brings the motion on her own, pro se, it's denied. Well, not to be dissuaded, she brings the same damn thing again. It's denied. If I'm recalling correctly, she brings that motion 3 times. So it's actually 5 times the judge denies the motion to have counterclaims included. Twice when she was represented and 3 times when she wasn't. I may be remembering that incorrect, but it was a staggering number. It was a staggeringly high number, more than the one that's permitted. And finally, the Judge Faust, had to just lay down the law and say, don't do this again. You can't do this anymore. Jenn Kamp has this idea, it appears, that if she continues to ask for something, that eventually she'll be able to get her way. And she'll be able to get the other party who's saying no to her to finally say yes. Apparently, it's something that's worked for her in her personal life. I don't know anything about her personal life, but usually when a person acts that way, it's because they've had some success with it. And so it's their go-to strategy. And this is what I've seen Jenn Kamp do over and over again. So in one of the motions that she made pro se, in order to get her counterclaims included, she also wanted to include me and others as counter defendants. So she wants to sue not only countersue not only John Dehlin and OSF, who brought the case against her originally. She wanted to actually kind of do a cross claim. She wanted to include us as defendants, me as a defendant. And that's when she was trying to sue me. Now, fortunately, when the judge denied this motion, like he denied the same dang thing several times before, it ended up removing the ability of Jenn Kamp to sue me. So I did a podcast about that. Jenn Kamp's lawsuit against RFM dismissed. And that's why it got dismissed. And I covered that about 10 months ago, according to YouTube. Then there was the hearing in which the judge ordered Jenn Kamp to take down her defamatory videos of John Dehlin. And actually, I think this was after he found her conduct to have been defamatory. Let me take a second and clear this up. There was never a trial on whether Jenn Kamp committed defamation. There was never a jury verdict on whether Jenn Kamp had committed defamation against John Dehlin. And the reason why is because Jenn Kamp had conducted herself so badly, hiding evidence, redacting evidence, refusing to comply with the disclosures requested by the other party as discovery, even when the judge ordered her multiple times, give this stuff to the other side, unredacted, she refused. And so what Jenn Kamp did, according to the judge, is she had engaged in so many shenanigans and hiding evidence and ending up destroying evidence that was material to the plaintiff's case, John Dehlin and OSF, that the judge finally said on motion of John Dehlin and OSF, few things happen without emotion, that they were not able to get a fair trial, that Jenn Kamp had conducted herself in such a way in spoliating the evidence that now plaintiffs could not get a fair trial. And because it was so extreme, you don't see this happening very much, folks, by the way, because it was so extreme, Judge Faust held that as a matter of law, Jenn Kamp had committed defamation. What else are you going to do? If you've got a defendant who's charged with defamation, who is continuing to destroy and not provide the evidence that would prove the defamation and the damages, what are you going to do as a judge? At some point, there has to be a consequence. And the consequence can only be that, because if it's a plaintiff acting this way, the judge can throw their case out of court. The judge could dismiss the plaintiff's case. If the plaintiffs in this case had been acting the way Jenn Kamp was, I'm sure the judge would have thrown their case out of court and dismissed it. But he can't dismiss a defendant's case because the defendant isn't bringing the case. The defendant is on the other side of the case. So the only thing the judge could do under such extreme circumstances was to make a ruling that as a matter of law, Jenn Kamp had committed defamation. And the only thing left was to determine damages. It was the same thing as if they had gone in front of a jury, presented all their evidence for days and days and perhaps weeks, and the jury came back with a finding that Jenn Kamp had committed defamation against John Dehlin and OSF. That's already taken care of. But now we have to have a hearing about the issue of damages. Defamation having been found, we have to find out how much damage she caused to John Dehlin and OSF. So a hearing was scheduled in August of last year, 2024, to have a hearing in front of the judge at which evidence would be presented about how much damages Jenn Kamp was going to have to pay. And after finding that Jenn Kamp had committed defamation, I believe it was after that finding that he ordered her to take down the defamatory videos. It could have been before. I'm not sure at this point. It happened rather close in proximity, I think. And then I did a podcast with an analysis about whether Jenn Kamp committed perjury. Yeah, did Jenn Kamp commit perjury? Do bees buzz? Does Spock beam up? Yeah. I think the analysis there is pretty conclusive, and I think the judge agreed with me. I also did a podcast when Jenn Kamp, after finding out that this judge was not going to grant her motions no matter how many times she brought them, she tried to kick the judge off the case. She filed a motion trying to get the judge recused, to get him to recuse himself, take himself off the case, saying he would be prejudiced because of a witness that she was going to call. Now, she wasn't saying that the witness she was going to call, by the way, she was never going to call this witness. This was a ruse. This was the witness ruse, I believe. She says, not that this witness I'm going to call is your friend. So you might have a problem being the judge in this case. And indeed, maybe it would be, but it wasn't that. She didn't say it was a friend of your father, Elder Faust, who was in the first presidency of the LDS Church, which is even more removed. No, she went a step further. And she said, the person I'm going to call was good friends, not with the judge or the judge's dad, but with the judge's dad's secretary a long time ago. Because Elder Faust has been gone for a long time. He's passed away some time ago. This was a dumb motion, and it was denied, as it should have been. The judge denied the motion. So I did a podcast about that. The Gavel Falls was another podcast I did. Jenn Kamp's credibility crisis. And this is where Jenn Kamp had been representing herself enough in front of the judge for about a half a year and made enough representations to the judge that contradicted other representations that she had made, that the Judge Faust, was finally getting wise to Jenn Kamp. And he ends up telling her at the end of a hearing what he thinks of her and why it is that he has so much trouble accepting what she says as being true. And I want to play the audio, not of course of the whole hearing, but just the audio at the end of the hearing, which I played at the very beginning of this podcast. So the $64 quote, the money quote, was at the end of the hearing. I played it at the beginning as well. And I also left it at the end of the hearing where it originally was. So let me see if I can find this for you. Okay, so I'll take you back to the thumbnail. Once again, I'll play the first few minutes of this. I'm going to cut out my intro music and just let it start at the very beginning where I begin speaking, and we'll see how this goes. Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3. This is Radio Free Mormon on the air, broadcasting behind enemy lines. Tonight's episode, The Gavel Falls. Jenn Kamp's credibility crisis. I have now obtained the audio of the hearing that was held in the 3rd District Court in Salt Lake City, where Judge Faust is the assigned judge in the litigation that is ongoing between John Dehlin, OSF, and Jenn Kamp. This hearing is over 4 hours long, and I'm not going to make you wait until the very end to hear what is likely the most important thing that was said during the course of this entire hearing. At the very end of the hearing, Judge Faust had some choice words which he addressed directly to Jenn Kamp. And here they are.
Frankly, I'm just going to be very candid. I'm having a challenge trying to decide how much I believe you. I'm having a challenge trying to decide how much of your response and your actions, this manner and the way that you've conducted the discovery and the responses, the filing of your motions, etc., is based upon ignorance and lack of understanding of how to handle these things by not being a lawyer versus taking actions or steps to not provide the information or not make it available. You generally judge people based upon the things that they say and what they do. And the severe inconsistencies in your position in responding to things causes a lot of concern. Frankly, I don't see a great deal of candor. I don't see a great deal of forthrightness.
Where though?
In providing, and we're not having a discussion. I'm
Sorry.
just telling you my thoughts.
Okay.
In weighing your believability. Okay. So I struggle with your information. I struggle with the things that you've done, and I struggle with the way that you respond. Frankly.
Now, all I can say is that if you are a party in a case in front of a judge and the judge is directing those words to you, that's not a good sign. Yes, Jenn Kamp's credibility crisis. It is a real bad thing when the judge starts telling you that he's having trouble believing your candor or your forthrightness, as Judge Faust did. He was obviously picking his words very carefully because he had some things he wanted to express, but he wanted to express them in such a way that they didn't come back and bite him. I can only imagine the pills he was popping back in chambers before each of these hearings and after. Then finally, Jenn Kamp loses the defamation case. Okay, so I've told you all about that. The Jenn Kamp loses the defamation case where the judge ordered it as a matter of law because of her conduct in hiding things and destroying things, evidence, relevant evidence, that he just found as a matter of law that she committed defamation. Game over. Now, this picture here of Jenn Kamp is one that Bill Reel came up with. And here's another behind-the-scenes story, okay? On all these thumbnails, I worked together with Bill to come up with them. He's the guy with the techno stuff. And almost from the beginning, he has been trying to do a comic or comedic version of cartoon version of Jenn Kamp. Like me. See, I'm there and I've got a cartoon version of me. And he thought it'd be funny to have a cartoon version of her and responding in certain ways, depending upon what it was the show was about. And I told him all the way along, no, let's not do that. I can be cartoon. That's okay. Jenn Kamp, we want to be above board about this. And we're criticizing the heck out of her because she deserves it. We don't have to make fun of the way she looks or anything. So she had this glam shot done, which I think she did sometime for her new podcast, which has, I think, gone defunct. Our Truth Be Told. So I said, let's use that. That's a nice shot of her. So that's why that shot appears in almost every one of the thumbnails, because every time that Bill Reel would suggest it, and he'd come up with examples, I said, yeah, it's great, but no, we're not going to do that. We're going to play this above board. This is one of the exceptions. All right. Well, on the Game Over, Jenn Kamp loses defamation case thumbnail, he came up with one where she looked harried, she looked frustrated. She looked like a loser, but she didn't look horrible. Okay. It wasn't funny. It wasn't cartoon. It looks like her. So we used that one. We did use that one, but everything else, with a couple of exceptions, but they're all good looking. None of them are cartoonish like I am. So I didn't want to make fun of her appearance the way I make fun of my own in the thumbnails. Okay, so that was the defamation hearing. Remember, she lost the defamation hearing. It was set over for a damages hearing, which never happened because she filed for bankruptcy in Washington State. There was the whole anti-stalking protection order hearing, which happened in March of 2023. Oh, this was a TikTok that I had made about this hearing. And I made it before the hearing happened. I made it in advance of the hearing so everybody would know that this was going on and when it was going on. At no point do I ask people to attend. Jenn Kamp misrepresented this video in a later court filing, or it might have been in a bar complaint filing against me, that I had encouraged people to show up. I did not encourage people to show up, but I did want people to know what was going on because it was pretty darn interesting to my audience. Newsflash. Jenn Kamp, former employee at Mormon Stories, has announced on her YouTube channel that on February 14th of this year, she went into the 3rd District Court in downtown Salt Lake City and obtained an anti-stalking order against John Dehlin. Now, that order is by its nature temporary until such time as a hearing can be scheduled so that both parties can show up and present their sides of the case. The newsflash is that according to the docket available at the website for the 3rd District Court, that hearing has now been scheduled for this coming Tuesday, March 7th at 9 o'clock in the morning. It should certainly be worth the price of admission. I will keep you apprised of further developments as I learn of them. Until then, this is Radio Free Mormon, reporting behind enemy lines. Yeah, I'm definitely thinking that the beard is an improvement. Let me know what you think in the live chat, if you even care. Okay, so that was going on. Now, here's what I want to tell you about with the protection order hearing. First off, it went to a full hearing. It lasted several hours. She was able to present her evidence. John presented his evidence. She lost. Her petition for the protection order, a permanent protection order, was denied after a judge heard all the evidence. And of course, after it was over, Jenn Kamp has plenty of excuses as to why it is that she lost and John won. She blamed her attorney. She blamed John Dehlin. She blamed everybody in the world except for herself, which is, I think, standard operating procedure when it comes to Jenn Kamp. So what happened is she lost the hearing. But as important as that is, I want to go over the timeline of what happened when she filed for this order. So first off, the procedure for the order is Jenn Kamp went to court. I think it was on Valentine's Day, if memory serves. It was very romantic. She went to court to get a temporary order, an order against John Dehlin, an anti-stalking order. Now, this is a preliminary hearing, which means nobody else is there. In other words, John Dehlin doesn't know about it. Nobody at OSF knows about it. She gets to go into court by herself on an ex-parte proceeding and have a hearing with the judge where she gets to tell the judge her side of the story, and the judge doesn't get to hear anybody else's side of the story. It's designed to be this way. So if a judge thinks that a person needs an order based on what they have told the judge will give them a temporary order. Now, it's a temporary protection order, subject to the other side being able to come to court, request a chance to have a hearing on the issue, and present their evidence so the judge can hear the other side of the story, which is what happened here. John was served with a copy of the order, and he went to court and said, I want a hearing, and they had the hearing, and Jenn lost after the judge heard both sides of the story, after the judge heard all the evidence instead of just the evidence that Jenn Kamp presented to the judge at the ex-parte hearing originally. But what it looked like was that Jenn Kamp was filing the ex-parte order against John Dehlin in retaliation for John Dehlin filing the lawsuit, the defamation suit against her, because they happened somewhat close in time, within 10 days or 14 days of each other. So now the timeline, all right? John Dehlin files his lawsuit, his defamation lawsuit against Jenn Kamp. OSF is involved as well, but John Dehlin files that against Jenn Kamp. Jenn Kamp is not served until some days later, all right? So he files the lawsuit, and then a copy of the lawsuit is served on Jenn Kamp, personal service required in order to commence the lawsuit. Now, during that time period, Jenn Kamp, on February 14th, 2023, filed for her ex-parte, her temporary protection order. And after she filed for that temporary protection order, she was officially served with the lawsuit. So what Jenn Kamp did, and what she said multiple times on the record, is that she did not know that John Dehlin had filed a lawsuit against her until she was served with the lawsuit. And by that time, she had already filed for her protection order. So what Jenn Kamp argued is that she was not retaliating against John Dehlin by filing the protection order because she hadn't been served with a lawsuit yet. The problem is my Facebook page, because I got a copy of this lawsuit prior to Jenn Kamp being served with it. Once again, she was served a number of days later. I got it not long after it was filed, and I was able to obtain it. I read it verbatim on a podcast. I posted that podcast on my Facebook page, as I often do. And what happened is that John files his lawsuit. Jenn Kamp gets her temporary order, and then Jenn Kamp gets served with the lawsuit that John filed. The problem is that my Facebook page post of my podcast where I read the lawsuit happens in between John filing the lawsuit and Jenn Kamp filing for her protection order. I read the entire lawsuit. I announced the lawsuit had been filed. So Jenn Kamp, if she knew about my podcast, would have known that John had filed a lawsuit against her. And indeed, it would have looked retaliatory that she went out and got a protection order against him, especially one so flimsy that got blown out of the water once the judge heard the other side of the story at a full hearing. So what happens is that she actually knew about my podcast. She knew about the lawsuit. And the way we can prove it, and I've got to give Gerardo Simano credit for this because he's a brilliant man. He figured this out. He looked for it. He found out that on my Facebook page, Jenn Kamp had made a comment. She showed up to make a comment where I had posted the podcast about me reading the lawsuit that John Dehlin had just filed against her. So we can actually prove, and we can show when it was she made that comment, which was within 12 hours, 24 hours of posting the video itself. So what we ended up being able to do, because Jenn Kamp came there and made a comment on my Facebook page. Thank you, Jen, by the way. You're always welcome. What we could prove was that Jenn Kamp did know that John Dehlin had filed a lawsuit against her before she got served with the lawsuit, and that Jenn Kamp did know that John Dehlin had filed a lawsuit against her before February 14th, Valentine's Day of 2023, when she went to court to get her ex parte order against John, that anti-stalking order against John. So what does a reasonable person think when a situation like that, when you know all the facts, looks like it is retaliatory? Her actions retaliatory against John Dehlin to file that anti-stalking petition, right? But it looks like it. It doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be retaliatory. Maybe that's just sort of the way things happen, right? You always got that argument. But what Jenn Kamp did on multiple occasions was she argued it was not retaliatory because she did not know. Because she did not know. That's the lie. Because she did not know that John Dehlin had filed a lawsuit against her before she filed the restraining order against him. She did know. So what does a reasonable person think? When it looks like, from the facts and the chronology, when it looks like this could be retaliatory. And on top of that, the person who looks like they could have been retaliatory starts lying about the chronology and what they knew when, in order to make it look like it's not retaliatory. When I see that, it starts looking pretty retaliatory to me. So speaking for me and my own opinion, based upon, 35 years of practicing law and doing lots of these hearings, that Jenn Kamp actually did retaliate against John Dehlin by filing that restraining order. That was an act of retaliation on her part. And it's proven by the fact that she did know that John Dehlin had filed a lawsuit against her before she filed for that restraining order. And then later on, she appears to have lied about it and said she didn't know. In other words, it wasn't retaliatory because I didn't know, but you actually did know. So that really does look like you're retaliating. Why would you lie about it unless you really were retaliating? What do you have to lie to cover up unless it's the retaliation? Okay, I think I've made that point. Let's go on, shall we? Okay, so let's go to my next slide. How Jenn Kamp tried to make it look like she didn't file the protection order against John Dehlin in retaliation for the lawsuit. I think I've definitely covered that. Let's move on. I did a podcast about Jenn Kamp losing her anti-stalking petition against John Dehlin, which once again happened at the conclusion of that hearing, that evidentiary hearing that Judge Coral Sanchez, I believe her name was, signed off on. Also, then I did a podcast about Jenn Kamp versus John Dehlin, the anti-stalking hearing part 1 in a 2-parter. I published the entire audio of that hearing. Once again, I do not believe I had any commentary in there whatsoever, just an introduction to let people know what the heck it was. Then I played the tape so people could hear what was going on and make their own decisions. This is what I was about. I was about trying to get the record out to the public so that you could see what was going on and compare it with maybe what Jenn Kamp was saying about it, or seeing what the evidence was that John Dehlin had versus the evidence that Jenn Kamp had. Oh my gosh, then there was the criminal charge against John Dehlin. We all remember that. That happened just a few months ago. Jenn Kamp had early on gone into the police and convinced them that John Dehlin had stalked her in violation of the no contact order. You remember this no contact order we were just talking about. It was in effect for like a few weeks as a temporary order until there was the hearing. There was time to schedule and have the hearing. And then it was dismissed. It was completely dismissed. Well, Jenn Kamp had gone in to the police and told them many months later, I think it was at the end of 2023, that she had been stalked, contacted by John Dehlin in violation of this anti-stalking order, which was no longer in effect and which Jenn Kamp perfectly well knew. And apparently she was persuasive enough to the police and to the prosecutor that she bamboozled them into filing criminal charges against John Dehlin for violating an order that did not even exist anymore. And once again, I predicted that it will be dismissed shortly as soon as John Dehlin's attorney calls him up and says, hey, you might want to look at this dismissal order. Somehow you managed to miss this when you were investigating the case, that the order doesn't even exist at the time she says it was violated. So maybe you should do the right thing and dismiss the charge, which they did. So that was an interesting offshoot of this, the criminal charge against John Dehlin. Yeah. And I did another episode about that where Jenn Kamp files criminal charges against John Dehlin. This is all documented. You can go back and look at all the documents I was able to get and able to produce and show to you. The bar complaints, of course, this is one of my favorite parts, was the bar complaints that Jenn Kamp and her friends filed against me. Jenn Kamp filed a bar complaint against me. And the reason why she filed a bar complaint against me is because I had released that video of the board meeting. She was very unhappy about that. She has been very unhappy about the transparency I brought to this procedure and showing the public what it is that's actually going on so they don't have to listen and believe her representations about what happened. They can actually look and see for themselves. And for some reason, this caused Jenn Kamp a great deal of concern. Once again, a nice picture of her on the screen and on the thumbnail. But she lost that bar complaint because it was public. It was public information. My gosh, what is the problem? The problem is she doesn't want you to see the public information. Then I got another bar complaint because apparently Jenn Kamp has some friends left. She has a friend who may or may not be an attorney, an immigration law attorney in Las Vegas. Somebody was able to track that down, whose name may or may not have been Rebecca Biblioteca. And was it Janet L. Cox? I think that was the name. But once again, we're not sure this is the person. This is the right person. But nevertheless, she filed a bar complaint following up on what Jenn Kamp did, which was the same complaint. So, of course, it got tossed as well. Once again, Jenn Kamp reaching out to her friend to have her friend file a bar complaint on the same issue, the same MO, the same method of operation. Keep asking until they say yes. Well, that strategy doesn't work with judges, and it didn't work with the Bar Association, who kept dismissing the complaints no matter how many of them they received. And then finally, there was a third bar complaint by Rosebud and Peffer McMullen, or Ann McMullen Peffer, who was John Dehlin's stalker. Well, I drew focus so she could stalk me for a bit and give John Dehlin a break. And so she filed a bar complaint against me, which was also dismissed. And I podcasted about that. Rosebud files bar complaint against RFM. That was episode 331, also about 10 months ago. So 3 bar complaints, 3 up, 3 down. I'm still practicing law and I still have a law license, Jen. No thanks to you. Just wanted you to know. Rosebud's bar complaint appeal goes up in flames. She even appealed it. All 3 of them appealed it. And by appeal, what I mean is it's not a formal appellate process like you would have with a court case, but you do have the ability to go back and to ask again. You got one person making the initial decision dismissed. If you request it be reconsidered, then it goes in front of a panel of 3 at the Bar Association, and they all dismissed it as well. And that happened with all 3 of the bar complaints. All 3 of them were appealed, and all 3 of them were dismissed on appeal as well. And then on July 5th, 2024, Jenn Kamp surprised the world and filed for bankruptcy. Yeah, we saw this coming from the beginning. I saw this coming from the beginning. Obviously, if she's going to get a judgment against her, a whopping judgment, she's just going to bankrupt out of it, which you can do. And apparently to OSF and John Dehlin, the principle of the case was worth pursuing, even though they knew that she was probably going to file for bankruptcy at the end of it. The surprising thing was that she did not file for bankruptcy at the end of it. She filed for it near the end of it, and in a strange way. Here's what happened. Jenn Kamp has already gotten her sham divorce from her husband, right? She has quitclaimed her interest in the house to her husband. So her husband is now the sole owner. So the sole owner husband is now putting the house on the market to sell it. And this is ready for sale at the end of July, I believe it was. So of course, this is the main asset that they're going after in the defamation case. They can't let her just get rid of it, for crying out loud. Otherwise, it's gone to the wind. So they bring a motion, they being OSF and John Dehlin, they bring a motion in court in Utah to forbid the husband from selling the house, to enjoin the sale of the house, or if it's going to be sold, that it be monitored and that all the money be put into trust with the court to be taken care of and determined about later on, just for safekeeping, so it doesn't vanish like it otherwise could. This motion on the part of OSF and John Dehlin freaked Jenn Kamp out. And what she did over the 4th of July weekend was that she ended up filing for bankruptcy to get out of this motion and get out of any ruling the judge might make on this motion. But she filed it in Washington State, Tacoma, where she said she had moved up to live in an apartment on a permanent basis. That was its own sideshow. And I covered all that in detail as well. So she files for bankruptcy right before the hearing on the plaintiff's motion that the sale of the house be enjoined. And the point of that is that once you file for bankruptcy, all other courts, with few exceptions, lose jurisdiction. Bankruptcy court takes jurisdiction away from Utah. And now the Utah court has no power, because they don't have any jurisdiction now, to make a ruling on anything that's in front of it. So it takes away from Judge Faust the ability to rule on this motion. The funny thing was, of course, that Judge Faust stated on the record that he would have denied the plaintiff's motions to enjoin the sale of the house. The problem with this whole thing was that it was now in the sole name of the husband. Jason, I think is his name, Jason Kamp. Jason Kamp is not a party to the lawsuit. It is OSF and John Dehlin versus Jenn Kamp, and only Jenn Kamp. So the problem that the plaintiffs faced with this motion, which was known going into it, is they're asking the judge to order a person to do, Jason Kamp, who's not a party to the lawsuit. Typically, if a person's not a party to the lawsuit, the judge doesn't have any authority to order them to do anything or to stop doing anything. But Jenn Kamp freaked out about the possibility the judge might grant that motion, filed for bankruptcy in Washington so the judge couldn't make that ruling. And they came out and they said, well, I guess we're not having this hearing after all, because she filed for bankruptcy. And then the judge says, by the way, I wouldn't have granted their motion anyway. So Jenn Kamp may have flushed herself out of the bushes prematurely on that one, but that's the way it went down. I did a podcast about, did Jenn Kamp get kicked out of bankruptcy court? No, she didn't. There was a motion that she have to go back to Utah and file there because she didn't have jurisdiction up here in Washington. And that was denied. That was denied. So she stayed in Washington. Now, technically, I think that the trustee for the bankruptcy court who filed the motion was correct, that the statutory requirements for jurisdiction in Washington in bankruptcy court were not met by Jenn Kamp. And she may have fabricated things in order to try and make it look like they did meet, when actually they did not. But I think the judge said, look, it's close enough for government work. By the time we get around to ruling on this, she will have been up here in Washington long enough. So the options are either I finish it here, it's already been started, We've already got a trustee assigned. We're already 3/4 of the way done with this case. Do we finish it up here in Washington, which would be the reasonable thing to do? Or do we kick it down to Utah, where it technically should be, but it's got to start over again from scratch? So the judge there in Washington said, yeah, we'll just keep it up here, which they did. By the way, I think this is the other exception, and maybe the only other exception, where we have a thumbnail that Bill made, which is not an actual picture of Jenn Kamp, but it is AI. And I made sure that it was something that was flattering and it did not look bad. So that's the story behind the thumbnail, once again. Then there was the story about how Jenn Kamp's own previous attorneys accused her of fraud. Yeah, this was the Hepworth legal attorneys, the ones that had done such a fine job of representing Jenn Kamp that they blew past the deadline for filing the counterclaims. Oh yeah, those attorneys. Then after she filed bankruptcy, she not only filed bankruptcy on John, she filed bankruptcy on other people too, obviously, all of her creditors, one of which was Hepworth Legal, to whom she owed around $90,000 or so, in addition to whatever money she'd already paid him. She was $90,000 in the hole when they parted ways, and they wanted to come after her in bankruptcy court to get her to repay them what she owed them. They filed a motion that said, we're a secured creditor. We're not an unsecured creditor. We're a secured creditor. Once again, briefly, bankruptcy law. Secured creditors are preferred. That means they have some kind of document or something that says that their debt is secured or protected by property owned by Jenn Kamp. Okay? That's what it is. And you have to have some kind of document that shows that, right? Otherwise, you're in the less favored category of unsecured creditors, which means she owes you money, but you got no security on it. Okay. There's no collateral on your debt. So that's a less favored category. If you are a secured creditor, then you are in a much more favored category because your claims are going to be treated before unsecured creditors are treated by the bankruptcy court. So what they did, though, was they had Jenn Kamp sign a document in order to attempt to secure her house as part of their lien, and they submitted it as an exhibit, this document. The document was so screwed up that it didn't even list the address of the house that they were seeking to secure by means of this document. And it ran afoul of the law so badly that when they presented to the bankruptcy judge and asked that it be considered a secured debt on this basis, the judge looks at it and says, no, you didn't do this right. You did not secure your debt appropriately under the law, and therefore you're not a secured debt, Mr. Hepworth Legal. You're an unsecured debt. Just like all these other people at the Open Stories Foundation and John Dehlin. Of course, they can't have their debt secured because their debt isn't even realized yet. They never got to the damages portion of the hearing. So they weren't able to secure that because it didn't even exist yet. So John Dehlin and OSF are unsecured creditors without a determined amount that she owes them. And Hepworth Legal goes to unsecured creditors because they goofed up the documents. I have to tell you that it is a bit ironic and perhaps poetic that the same attorneys, Hepworth Legal, who represented Jenn Kamp and screwed up the case by forgetting and blowing past the deadline, making them unable to file counterclaims for Jenn Kamp. Maybe it is poetically ironic that those same attorneys failed to secure their debt for legal fees on Jenn Kamp's house because of the same reason, because they screwed up the paperwork. They did something wrong. That's why I say a little bit poetic there. Sucks to be you, Hepworth Legal. The next slide has to do with John Dehlin makes a bold move against Jenn Kamp. And this is going to take us up to the most recent developments, I think. So what John Dehlin, through his attorneys and OSF's attorneys, did was in bankruptcy court. By the way, they had to retain another attorney who did bankruptcy law in Washington in order to represent them. So these are the kind of legal fees that OSF and John Dehlin are having to pay. So what they did through their attorneys in bankruptcy court was John Dehlin made a motion. And the motion is regarding the damages from the defamation suit, where Jenn Kamp has been found as a matter of law to have committed defamation, but the damages have not been ascertained because she filed for bankruptcy before they had the damages hearing. John Dehlin wants that damages hearing. He wants a judicial ruling on what that amount is. And it can be one of two places. It can be in bankruptcy court, because remember, bankruptcy court has all the jurisdiction, which means they can hold hearings on any case that they've assumed jurisdiction from, including a defamation damages hearing. But it doesn't really make that much sense for the bankruptcy court to do it because the bankruptcy court doesn't know anything about this. Judge Faust in Utah has been dealing with this case for a long time. He knows about it. So the motion is to the judge in bankruptcy court on behalf of John Dehlin and OSF to allow this court in Utah to lift the stay of bankruptcy, the bankruptcy stay, for the purposes, the limited purposes of going down to Utah and having that damages hearing and letting Judge Faust hear the evidence and make a ruling as to how much damages Jenn Kamp owes John Dehlin and how much in damages Jenn Kamp owes to Open Stories Foundation. And then we'll have this number, and then we'll be able to put that in as an unsecured debt in the bankruptcy proceeding. They're not going to get all their money back, not by a long shot, but at least they'll be put in with the unsecured creditors so they can all share and share alike and get something back on what it is that Jenn Kamp owes them. Jenn Kamp responded through her attorney that she didn't want it to go back to Utah. She wanted to stay there in Tacoma court and have the bankruptcy judge hear the damages hearing. Well, this was put off a bit. And what happened was this, is that the parties came together, okay? They actually agreed on something. And what they agreed on was that whether we have this damages hearing in Utah or whether we have this damages hearing in Tacoma, it's going to be long, it's going to be nasty, and most importantly, it's going to cost a lot more money. So tell you what, why don't we just make an agreement? John Dehlin presents what he believes are the estimates and calculations, and they're backed up, for what he feels that he is owed in damages for the defamation that Jenn Kamp committed against him. And Open Stories Foundation does the same thing. They present the amount that they feel they've been damaged. And so they talk, attorneys talk back and forth. They end up signing off on an agreement on the amount of damages that Jenn Kamp owes to John Dehlin and the amount of damages that Jenn Kamp owes to Open Stories Foundation. And it's sizable. I'll tell you right now, I'll look at the documents here in a second, but John Dehlin is around $400,000. It's a little north of that, I believe. And Open Stories Foundation is around $700,000. The total defamation damages agreed to by Jenn Kamp as fair and reasonable is over $1 million. I think it's about $1,100,000, and I'll have the numbers here in a second, that she was assessed in damages for the defamation that she committed against John Dehlin and Open Stories Foundation. Now, the bigger the number, I expect maybe the more they'll get back, although it's still just going to be pennies on the dollar that they'll be getting back in bankruptcy court. It may be around tens of thousands of dollars. It could be maybe in the neighborhood of 100,000 total that they might get back through bankruptcy court. We'll have to see. There's a 3-year repayment plan, but that's the estimates. So if you're getting back, even if you get back 100,000, which is pretty much, I think, the best case scenario at this point, on $1,100,000, you're obviously getting less than 10 cents on a dollar. I think I did that math right. It'd be 10 cents on the dollar if it was $1 million. If it's paying back $1,100,000, then you're getting less than 10 cents on your dollar. But that's the name of bankruptcy court. And on the other hand, it's better than a sharp stick in the eye. Now I'm going to go to the documents that were recently filed in January that talk about this agreement between the parties, why it is they reached the resolution, and the final order that memorializes, signed by the judge, this agreement between the parties as to what the damages are and should be. And now it's what the damages are because it's an order signed by the judge. And here is that document. You'll see in the upper right-hand corner, it's in front of the Honorable Mary Jo Heston, Chapter 13, Bankruptcy. The hearing date for this motion was January 23rd, 2025 at 1 o'clock p.m. That hearing never happened because, as I said, this was entered into by agreement of the parties. Or if the hearing did happen, it was simply a pro forma hearing and the judge signed off on this agreed order as judges usually do. It is titled, Motion to Approve Stipulation Allowing Amount and Treatment of Claims of Open Stories Foundation and John Dehlin. It starts off in the normal way by talking about who the people are involved in this. And beginning with paragraph 1, it says Jennifer Ruth Kamp, debtor, filed a petition for relief under Chapter 13 of the U.S. Bankruptcy Code on July 5th, 2024. On September 12th, 2024, John Dehlin filed a proof of claim in the Chapter 13 bankruptcy proceeding in the amount of $400,000 even. They call that the Dehlin claim. And OSF filed a proof of claim in the amount of $732,528.50. I wonder what the 50 cents was for. That's the OSF claim. Both claims arise from a defamation lawsuit pending in the 3rd District Court in Salt Lake City, Utah, Open Stories Foundation and John Dehlin versus Jennifer Kamp, and there's the case number. They're going to refer to that as the Utah State Court litigation, the defamation suit, right? In support of their claims, OSF and Dehlin attached relevant pleadings from the Utah Court state litigation, including orders entered by the Utah Court, Judge Faust, awarding attorney's fees and costs to OSF and Dehlin, because remember, they'd already racked up quite a sizable amount in attorney's fees prior to Jenn Kamp filing in bankruptcy. And those had been granted and ordered by the judge. And striking the debtor's answer and affirmative defenses. The claims are reasonable estimates of the damages likely to be awarded by the Utah court. Now, once again, ultimately, all of this gets agreed to by the parties. So this isn't just one side making their argument. This is what's going to be agreed to. Recognizing that their claims were not liquidated, okay? They were never ascertained. They never had the damages hearing. Dehlin and OSF filed a motion for relief from stay on September 19th, 2024 that was asking the bankruptcy judge to let them go to Utah to hash this thing out and find out what the damages are, to permit them to conclude the defamation lawsuit pending in the Utah State Court litigation for the limited purpose of liquidating their claims and determining the damages to be awarded. Dehlin and OSF argued that allowing the Utah court to determine the amount of damages was the most efficient use of judicial resources, because the Utah court has been presiding over the dispute between Ms. Kamp and OSF and Mr. Dehlin since February 7th, 2023. That's the day he filed the lawsuit, 1 week before Valentine's Day. The Utah court was also intimately familiar with the issues between the parties, having entered numerous rulings in the lawsuit, and was prepared to immediately rule on the issue of damages. The debtor, Jenn Kamp, the debtor responded to the motion, arguing that it had not objected to the claims, and therefore any relief from stay was premature. The debtor also argued that she could not afford to continue to represent herself in the Utah State Court litigation. This court heard argument, the bankruptcy court, heard argument on the motion for relief from stay on October 10th, 2024. That's when the judge didn't rule on the motion, but instead said he agreed to continue the hearing to allow the debtor, Jenn Kamp, an opportunity to decide whether she would object to John Dehlin's claims and OSF's claims, their amount of damages that they were proposing. Thereafter, the parties began discussions to resolve the Dehlin and OSF claims. The debtor, Jenn Kamp, did not object to the amount of the claims, that $400,000 for John Dehlin and $700,000 plus for OSF, but did object to the characterization of the claims. Now, there's a not there, and I think that not is not supposed to be there. The sentence as it reads is, Jenn Kamp, or the debtor, did not object to the amount of the claims, but did not object to the characterization of the claims. That's wrong. The debtor, Jenn Kamp, did not object to the amount of the claims, but she did object to the characterization of the claims, and that's why they agreed. We'll just make them generalized damages. Dehlin and OSF agreed to remove the itemization of the amounts of the claims that is attached as an addendum to both claims, and instead provide a dollar amount of the claims. This was acceptable to Jenn Kamp. Sounds like we got an agreement. On November 5th, 2024, the Chapter 13 trustee filed an objection, though. This was odd. The trustee files an objection, even though the parties are in agreement. The trustee is going to file an objection to the Dehlin claim and the OSF claim on the basis that the claims are not liquidated. Well, they weren't liquidated, but they finally came together and they agreed on the amount. They liquidated the claims by agreeing to this is the amount of damages. They presented it to the court, and now that they had been liquidated, the court signed off on the agreed motion, making it an order. This is how much in damages Jenn Kamp's defamation cost to OSF, and how much in damages Jenn Kamp's defamation cost to John Dehlin. $400,000 even for John Dehlin. That's an easy number to remember. In response to the trustee's objection, the parties filed their stipulation with the court. The stipulation provides in relevant part, quote, for purposes of resolving the trustee's objection only, the debtor, Jenn Kamp, Dehlin, and OSF hereby stipulate and acknowledge that Dehlin has a liquidated claim in the amount of $400,000. Without reference to any itemization of such account. Remember, they agreed to just say, we'll just have the money amount. No itemization or categorization other than that. And that OSF has a liquidated claim in the amount of $732,528.50 without reference to any itemization of such amount. The parties respectively request this court to approve the stipulation, which the court did, of course. Under the rules of bankruptcy, 9019, a bankruptcy court, here they're citing the law where the judge has the ability to do this. Of course, the judge can do this. And they're talking about the law that involves. Applying these standards, it says the stipulation is fair and equitable. First, unquestionably, Dehlin and OSF would be successful in the Utah court state litigation. Well, of course they would. They've already won. The judge already found that Jenn Kamp had committed defamation. So, of course, they would have been successful. As detailed in the declaration of Jennifer Tomchak, that's the attorney for OSF and John Dehlin, the Utah state court litigation has been very contentious. Yeah, you could say that. The Utah court previously entered a series of orders and judgments, including awarding Dehlin and OSF attorney's fees and striking the debtor's answer and affirmative defenses. Right? Even her answer was stricken. She didn't even have a defense. She was left sitting in the water because of her previous attorneys, Hepworth Legal. Liability has been established. The remaining issue to be decided is the amount of damages, right? And the stipulation goes on to say why it's in everybody's interest to enter this agreement between the parties. The fourth and final factor is also met. Finally, it says at the bottom here, finally is recognized in this decision, blah, blah, blah. In sum, the stipulation eliminates the inherent risk associated with litigation, mitigates the attendant costs and emotional burdens, and reduces the delay in making distributions to creditors. So all these things weigh in favor of the judge signing the agreed order, and the judge does. And that was presented by Christopher E. Allen. I told you that Open Stories Foundation and John Dehlin had to get their own bankruptcy attorney up in Washington to represent them in the bankruptcy court. And that's who this was, I believe, Christopher Allen. And there's the Exhibit A, the stipulation liquidating the claim. I'm not going to go through that anymore. I'm just going to go right to the order of the judge that the judge signed. And here is that order. This is actually the top of the order. It looks like the bottom of the order, but they do things there in such a way that the judge doesn't sign at the bottom of the order like they do here in Washington. At least that's been my experience for 35 years. But instead, they sign it at the top of the order, which, has its own benefits. You don't have to go digging through a document to get to the end, which is sometimes harder to find when you're in a court file full of documents looking for it, right? You don't have to go looking for the end of the document to find the judge's signature because it's right there on the top. And this is signed by the judge. It was signed on January 23rd, 2025, so very recently. And this is what the order says. And once again, this should conclude the case as far as the bankruptcy case and everything else as far as that goes. The bar complaints have been resolved in my favor, thankfully. The criminal complaint against John Dehlin was dismissed. The defamation case is over. So this should bring all the legal actions between John Dehlin and Jenn Kamp to a close. Once again, signed January 23rd, 2025, in re the matter of Jennifer Ruth Kamp in bankruptcy court. Here's the order. This matter having come before the court on the motion of Open Stories Foundation and John Dehlin to approve the stipulation by and among Jennifer Ruth Kamp, Open Stories Foundation, and John Dehlin, its agreed order, allowing amount and treatment of claims of Open Stories Foundation and John Dehlin, the stipulation. The court considered the motion and any opposition thereto, which there was none, and the matters on record. It is therefore ordered that the stipulation by and among Jennifer Ruth Kamp, Open Stories Foundation, and John Dehlin attached as Exhibit A to the motion of Open Stories Foundation and John Dehlin, allowing amount and treatment of claims of Open Stories Foundation and John Dehlin, is hereby approved. Approved. That's the key word. It is approved. It's signed by the judge, January 23rd, 2025. This ball game is over. All right? It is done. Now, something crazy could happen. God knows crazy things have happened during the course of this lawsuit. And they happened before this lawsuit. And they may happen after this lawsuit is over. We'll have to see. But as far as I can tell, this is the epilogue. By the way, the reason I'm calling this John Dehlin versus Jenn Kamp epilogue is in memory of those old TV shows. They were detective shows. They were usually an hour long. They were a Quinn Martin production. Anybody out there old enough to remember a Quinn Martin production? Streets of San Francisco was a Quinn Martin production. I think The Fugitive was. It was like they owned back in the 60s, late 60s, early 70s. They owned a lot of the really, really popular detective shows or crime shows. And they would divide them up. This is what they did, right? The first part, it's like an hour-long show. The first part before the first commercial was called Act 1. Then it would be Act 2, then Act 3, then Act 4. And then the little bit of the show after the last commercials, the very little bit of the show they have there was called Epilogue. And they would have the voiceover, the guy saying, epilogue. So that's what this is. John Dehlin versus Jenn Kamp, epilogue. And that little word approved there is the epilogue. It is approved. So now, not only has Jenn Kamp been found in court to have defamed John Dehlin and Open Stories Foundation, she has been found in court to have damaged them to the amount of $400,000 for John Dehlin. She damaged John Dehlin $400,000 by her defamation of John Dehlin, and she defamed Open Stories Foundation to the amount of over $700,000. Between them, $1.1 million. That's the damages. That's how much Jenn Kamp defamed John Dehlin and Open Stories Foundation. It's on the books. It's a matter of law now. So let me give you a few more details that I think you'll be interested in. Because I was named as a debtor in this bankruptcy case, not once but twice, for whatever reason, an abundance of caution, I imagine. Jenn Kamp owed me nothing. I was not her creditor, okay? But out of an abundance of caution, she listed me as well. So I get these things mailed to me because they have to mail these things out to everybody. Her attorney does. It costs a lot of money in copying and in postage. So I have a copy of the repayment plan that Jennifer Kamp is going to have to follow. It is in super tiny print. It is so tiny, I had to get out my magnifying glass and look at it just earlier this morning. And I jotted down some facts from it, which I think you'll be interested in. First off, this is a 36-month repayment plan where she is going to have to make certain payments to the trustee every month, which he is then going, according to the calculations he's gone through, will distribute it to her creditors. First to secured creditors, and then after they are paid off, then it'll start going to the unsecured creditors, of which John Dehlin and Open Stories Foundation and Hepworth Legal are all in that same basket. It's a 36-month repayment plan. She is ordered by the court to pay every month $582.51 to the trustee on that repayment plan. I did some math, and it looks like over the 36 months, that comes to about $21,000, $20,970.36. So rounding it up to $21,000. She also has to contribute any tax refunds that she gets during those 3 years. Her lawyer gets $23,000, actually $23,220.39. And when I say her lawyer, I mean her bankruptcy lawyer, the guy who represented her in this bankruptcy. You see, when you're in bankruptcy and you're representing somebody, you get your cut off the top. There's a certain order to the way money is distributed. You get your money off the top. If a debtor owes any money to the government, then the government gets their money too off the top. Actually, usually you can't even bankrupt out of it. So there's a certain pecking order on how these debts are paid. And the debtor's attorney, Jenn Kamp's attorney, is right up there at the top. So I imagine that he has already gotten paid. He has $23,220.39. He asked for $45,000. So it looks like the judge cut that almost in half. But that's what he gets for his representation of Jenn Kamp. The Taylorsville property, the house that used to be Jenn Kamp's home before she moved up here to Washington, was valued by her at $1,104,000. So the price of the house at $1,104,000 was almost exactly the same amount, coincidentally, as the amount of damages that were assessed against Jenn Kamp for her defamation of John Dehlin and Open Stories Foundation. Her half of that amount was $552,000. So that is also on the chopping block. Whatever half of the recovery of the amount of the sale of the house, which I think has already happened under the direction of the trustee, so he's got hold of the money. That has already occurred. So there's around $500,000 to satisfy judgment. And finally, for the last and final strange twist to this, in her repayment plan, she values all the property that she has as part of this. It's a rather detailed document, in addition to being very small print. Finally, Jenn Kamp claimed her wedding ring as property in the amount of $1,000. And I checked when this was signed. It was signed in September of 2024, which I thought was strange since she'd been divorced from her husband, Jason, for a number of months before that. But I guess that old wedding ring still has some sentimental value for Jenn, doesn't it? Yeah, since they're not really divorced. Or I should say they are really divorced, but only on paper. They're still living together in this apartment in Gig Harbor, Washington. Well, I hope they're very happy together. And I just want to take this chance to thank all of you who have followed this lawsuit and all the different lawsuits and all the different complaints for the past 2 years. It's been my pleasure to bring them to you. I will let you know if anything else happens. But honestly, this has been a wild ride. And I have actually been trying hard and almost successful and may still be successful at getting an interview with Jenn Kamp, not Jenn Kamp, Jenn Kamp. Another irony or coincidence is that the first name of the attorney representing John Dehlin and OSF is Jenn, one N, Jen, and it's against Jenn Kamp with two N's. So it's Jenn Kamp. Almost have her willing to do an interview. There are certain things that have to be ironed out first, if that's going to happen. And there's no telling at this point whether that will happen, but she's definitely interested. We'll have to see if everybody agrees to it. I think it would be a lot of fun to have two attorneys, maybe even call Colby in, have it hit him more fresh and get his responses to things. That would be a lot of fun. Colby Reddish, my attorney friend from Idaho. So anyway, if that happens, and that would take several months for it to happen if it does, I will be back revisiting it because I think it would be funny to have attorneys talking about what happened here. I've tried to give a little flavor for that, even without Jenn Kamp on the show, because that may never happen. And I wanted to let everybody know the significant things that were happening behind the scenes that I can tell you about. I've done that. We've taken the trip down memory lane. We've seen how this concluded. Jenn Kamp, into the story. She was found to have committed defamation against John Dehlin to the tune of $400,000, and she was found to have committed defamation against the Open Stories Foundation to the tune of $730,000. All totaled $1,000,001. That's how much defamation Jenn Kamp managed to do against John Dehlin and Open Stories Foundation. That's a lot of defamation. Congratulations, Jenn. Well, that's about all for tonight. Please hit like, please hit subscribe, and thank you to all of you who've gone the extra mile, gone to radiofreemormon.org, click the donate button, and made a donation. Monthly donations are preferred. $5 a month, whatever you can afford. If you appreciate the news and information and insight that Radio Free Mormon brings to your life, please go there today, make that donation. You'll feel better about it, and so will I. Well, as I say, that's about all for tonight. Until next time, this is Radio Free Mormon, signing off the air.